Welcome to the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast with Borg, Betz, and a baller.
Welcome in. It's a big episode here. Episode 155. The people are excited.
Mid-intro. Didn't let the guitar play out there, Kyle. I mean, you were just excited for this show. And who wouldn't be? Because the people, I don't think they were super happy with the order we went. People are really excited about this wide receiver class, rightfully so. And you guys did running backs without me, unfortunately. Then we hit quarterbacks, which we could really say it's quarterback, and the tight end group, which, I mean, I like the tight ends. I'm excited. But the wide receivers are the headliners here. So people, I think, have been waiting, where is the wide receiver show? It is here, but I think we're going to need 3 episodes to talk about all the prospects here. It's a deep class, but we're going to talk about the big names that you all probably know by now. I'm excited about today's show. It should be a good one.
I feel like with wide receivers, you and I get to paint with a couple of different paintbrushes. And
very sophisticated.
Yeah, I know that hits most of our audience who spend the offseason just painting in front of a canvas. But we get to describe them in a lot of different ways. We get to talk about, here's the type of routes this player used. Here's how they're using their offense. Here's how they profile. Here's how they compare to the NFL. Here's what they're not doing. And I like going through all those different doors. It would be very easy to say, this player's number one on my board. And, you can give a statistic that says, here's the breakout age or here's their production. When right now it's February 25th, I haven't fully arrived with this class yet. That's okay.
For sure. And actually, one of the guys we're going to talk about today, when you hear bits and pieces about a certain player, you start to get this image of your mind of what the player is and is not. And then, and that can be good or bad, just depending on how you do your process. But when you go back and then actually kind of dive back into the numbers further, watch them for a second or third time, you start to notice stuff you didn't notice the first time. And so you change your opinion a little bit. And I think that's okay. People want black and white as early as possible in this process to say, here's the rankings. They're not really going to change. This is definitely wide receiver 1. This is definitely wide receiver 4. But the truth is, a lot of this stuff is going to develop and change over the course of the next 2 to 3 months when we get one of the biggest pieces of the entire puzzle, which is draft capital. We mentioned last week at the tight end position. It matters, but it can be overblown because certain tight ends are drafted for a specific role in an offense. At wide receiver, we know the deal. These top round 1 guys that go in the top 10, top 15, the hit rate is awesome. The fringe guys, the guys that slip to day 2, it's kind of a crapshoot. So we're going to get that final data piece that will shift a little bit of thinking on some aspects of what we're doing here. But it is fun to just let this be a fluid process throughout the entire spring until we finally get to a decision. And really, you don't have to make that decision, honestly, unless you're doing a sicko-style Dynasty League where you're doing your draft before the NFL draft. You don't have to make that decision until late April. So we have time to just get this information, watch some more tape, do all those things, let the combine happen, and go from there.
One of the data points that I think kind of makes sure that people understand how important and how much we don't know yet. One of our writers, Marvin Eloquin, he does a lot of our Dynasty stuff. He put out this tweet, and I thought it was really helpful. He looked at the correlation coefficients, which is really fun stuff.
Oh my gosh, Kyle. You already lost half the audience.
What correlates most with fantasy points per game for prospects?
Nerd.
The lowest possible thing you could look at is their 3-cone drill. It's not great. And we talk about that a lot. 40 time was next lowest, as in it doesn't correlate very well. People running around in their underwear as fast as they can. Vertical. So a lot of the combine stuff we would say for wide receivers will inform probably more so what the NFL thinks than how we look at it for fantasy. And then, yards per out runs, fine. I talk about it a lot. We talk about it a lot. It's fine. It gives us an indicator of what they did in college. But by far, the data point that is the strongest to fantasy point production isn't that crazy. It's just draft capital. So at the end of the day, if you have a round 1 wide receiver and the NFL thinks about him that way, that should weigh heavily into the process. It's not the only part. It's not the end all be all, but that's what we will find over the next, month or so. So let your process evolve over time. Don't just take one tweet that Betz threw out there where he's just trashing the universe about a certain player and let that ruin your day.
Kyle, these guys are all going to the Hall of Fame, okay? So I only put out the good stuff about all these players, so you won't find any negatives on my profile. But before we jump into the show, I would be remiss if we didn't just bring up the fact that corporate sucks. I mean, where are these guys?
That is the longest intro. I know there's people clocking you right now, as the kids say, clocking. And if we're over 5 minutes in.
This is ridiculous. Ridiculous. I mean, they don't care about the show. They don't care about you guys. But Kyle and I, we love you. We all love you so much. We're here for you to break down these prospects. But yeah, corporate, let's just say they're in off-season mode and they might not come back. I'm just kidding. They'll be here next week.
Yeah, they'll be back. They'll totally be back. Speaking of corporate, we do need to mention that if you order the UDK or the UDK Plus before March 1st, that's coming up, you are entered to win a spot in the Listener League. You get the lowest possible price, and you get access to all of the profiles, all of our write-ups. We're adding in our scouting report notes of the players that we're talking about on today's podcast, the top-end quarterbacks, running backs, tight ends. All of those are found in the Dynasty Pass, and the best part is that thing updates throughout the process. So we'll have our risers and fallers after the combine. We will get to add, some more info. And then the best part is that you get the UDK. You get the Ultimate Draft Kit, which year in, year out, we do the math. It ends up being about 90 to 100,000 words worth of information that you can spend your entire summer just reading away.
I mean, some people say, in the summer, it's a great time to go outside, see your family. If you got kids, hang out with your kids. We say, no, sneak away from your family, read the Ultimate Draft Kit every day, basically until kickoff, and your entire summer will be made. No, man, it's such a good deal. I love it. And you mentioned that update is coming basically a week from yesterday. We'll have that out there as the combine is happening this week. I know last week you were like, hey, in a month when the combine happens, I was like, Kyle, it's literally 2 weeks. So it's combine week, which I'm excited about. And we'll have the update for you guys, risers, fallers. And you mentioned last week that little tidbit about our scouting notes and stuff like that are in there. Those will be added as well in this next update, I should say, which is happening literally next week.
UltimateDraftKit.com if you want to get in on that. I do have a fun, quick question before we hit the top 5 prospects. I was inspired by a tweet from Daniel Jeremiah, who's truly, one of the GOATs of the industry, one of the people that we look to the most in this season. Not perfect, but I think he does a good job of kind of giving a pulse of where things are. And he threw this out there. He said there will be a lot of variance in wide receivers, and he mentions edge rushers across different teams. There are so many similarly graded players with totally different skill sets. It's a flavor draft. And I thought about that because when we talk about the receivers today, we analyze them and their skill set and how they're utilized. We need to think that NFL GMs and teams are thinking about their team, they're thinking about the coaching staff, the offensive system, and they might approach this very differently across the board. We'll talk about Makai Lemon. If you want a slot wide receiver, hint, he's not just a slot wide receiver, but that's kind of how he's been profiled. A team might pick him over Jordyn Tyson, who profiles a little differently, in the same way with Carnell Tate. So I wanted to ask you this question. We're going to develop this together. Let's think about categories for NFL wide receivers, and then what type of flavor are they? And I'm going to just, comp them to wings. Are you a big wing guy?
I actually do like wings a lot. I used to go once a week with all my high school buddies. It's obviously a long time ago. I had wings most recently, a week ago, for the first time in a month, and I was like, man, I kind of forgot how good these are. So I am a wing guy. I do like them.
My boys are starting to get into it. So that's part of they don't like the hot stuff, but they're willing to try out different things. And so I'm kind of rolling with it. And I took a couple of flavors here for our little process that are from my favorite wings spot. Okay. So just a little shout out, ATL's Best Wings. That's what I'm going for here. Those are the flavors that I know. They just, it's for the SEO. They're
I was going to say, if you search Atlanta's Best Wings, that has to come up first.
Oh, for sure. No, if I'm starting up a new restaurant, it's going to be restaurant near me. That's what it's going to be called. So the first category we're going to do is X wide receiver. So basically the receivers that can do it all, that profiles number one. They're often physical because they get pressed at the line of scrimmage. For me, the flavor, this is my favorite flavor, okay, is lemon pepper. I don't know if you feel the same way.
It's not my favorite, but I do like it.
Okay, so that's my go-to. If I'm thinking do it all wide receiver and I'm picking a wing, it's usually lemon pepper. Who are the wide receivers that come to your mind in the NFL right now?
I mean, how does the first name not be Jamar Chase? Right? He literally can do everything.
Because it's Puka Nacua.
Puka would be up there.
It's
Justin Jefferson will be up there. Who else you got? AJ Brown in his prime is up there.
I think of Chase and Puka as the ones that can block at the line of scrimmage too. Where like Puka was probably one of the best wide receiver blockers in the league last year, and then obviously had an unreal season. So those are the two. I think Neighbors could be that guy. He just doesn't have the same frame as Chase and Puka. So when I'm thinking like X wide receiver, the flavor, if your team wants it, those are the guys that you model after. If you're looking for a slot wide receiver, which to me, that's teriyaki. It's not for everybody, okay? But sometimes that's what I want.
That's a good comp. I like that. I mean, the first name that comes to mind for me, you guys will be shocked to hear this, is Amon-Ra St. Brown.
What's weird about Amon-Ra, which we'll talk about him today and kind of explain how he's comped so much to Makai Lemon, is that he's had so much more success even on the outside the last couple of years. So when he came out of USC, he was seen as a slot wide receiver who fell to the 4th round, but he actually played a lot outside his final year at USC. So it's like the best slot wide receiver in football right now, Amon-Ra, is also kind of one of the best outside. It's wild to be able to say that. I put Ladd down as one of my favorites.
Ladd, I'm so disappointed by last year, but yes, he is up there. You have Chris Olave on the list. I think that's fine. CeeDee Lamb, certainly up there on the list. These guys, this is like the cheat code in fantasy. The guys that can move into the slot and get the high percentage layup type stuff, but also in 2 wide receiver sets, they don't leave the field. They just kick outside and they still win. That is like what the top tier receivers are in the NFL today. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and obviously I have to mention Keenan contractually because truly one of the greats. What about someone who is a zone buster? So if you're looking for a wide receiver that they have the IQ, the ability to read the defenses, I put them down as like this is just a standard. You need this no matter what, like a Buffalo, like a medium hot wing.
The classic.
Yes.
Everybody likes it. You got to have it. Yeah, JSN, Justin Jefferson, CD. What do you think about Drake London?
I think London's an interesting name to throw in here because he came into the league as like, oh, well, this is just a jump ball guy. And slowly but surely, they've moved him in the slot and manufactured these, easier targets for him. Now, he's had a hard time staying on the field just because he's been hurt every so often. The team's also had a lot of turnover at quarterback. But London might be one of those players that when we're comparing prospects in the future, we shouldn't just say this guy's just a downfield guy, 50-50 ball guy. He can do a lot of different things. And so he is one of my favorite players. Obviously, I'm a Falcons fan, but I feel like he's just like a smart player. He knows how to use his body, he knows how to use space. He's a Buffalo.
Literally.
All right, I need something spicy here. Who is the wide receivers that you think of when you think of stretching the defense? So if a team needs somebody to get behind the defense, keep defenses honest, who are the wide receivers you think of?
But the guys that'll actually see a target when they do it?
Yes, not the 9 route and not the Calvin Austins.
Okay. There's also Jahan Dotson who will do this, but he will not see the ball at all this year. I mean, when you have JMO on the other side of the line of scrimmage, don't you just have fear in your heart? Like, what could possibly happen. George Pickens, when he's at the height of his game. George Pickens, I think Scary Terry is probably an underrated pick for this because last year was so tough injury-wise, and obviously the Commanders had a really significant regression from what they did 2 years ago. But when he and Jaden are on, Terry on the deep ball is money.
Yeah, and if you need a discount spicy, like Kayshon Boutte, he's kind of morphed into that player. I don't like super spicy wings though. I need to put that out there.
I do like spicy, but there's definitely a fine line. Like my brother-in-law, he enjoys when he's crying and it hurts. I'm like, I don't. I guess that's fine for some people, but that level to me is not fun. But he loves it. So I do like spicy, but there's a fine line.
And I don't really have in-depth conversations with people, but if you have truly spicy stuff, are you just paying for it the next day? Are you just brutally murdered when you're on the toilet?
I will ask my brother-in-law.
Okay, no,
I'll report back.
Tell him it's from me. A couple more categories here. Looking for a red zone weapon. So somebody that has the footwork, the jump ball ability. This is the honey barbecue. Barbecue is kind of a safe standard, but I like the honey barbecue a little bit more.
Yeah, I do too. How do you not go with the goal line wide receiver?
Nice.
Devontae Adams. In the red zone, that guy is unbelievable. Mike Evans, touchdown machine. I like that you have Courtland Sutton on this list because I feel like Courtland Sutton when he came out as a prospect, he was like the hotness, right? Everybody was very excited about him. And then he kind of had like a 4-year lull where it was like, he's fine. And now he's had this like 2-year resurgence with Bo Nix where he's been very good. So I do like Courtland Sutton on the list here.
What's interesting about that class that he came out of was 2018. He came out of SMU, second-round pick. A lot of those dudes just haven't lasted that long in the NFL. It was like Christian Kirk was in that class. Michael Gallup was in that class. And then you have like DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley that have hung around. But like Sutton's kind of just stayed pretty consistent, getting the extra contract recently. So it's not the sexy. Honey barbecue is not the sexiest thing that you could order. Put it that way.
Certainly not.
Okay. All right. 2 more categories here. I'm just talking about a playmaker. If an NFL team says, I just need to add somebody who's a playmaker, the quote, get the ball in his hands guy, I put Caribbean jerk, which I don't know if you like that flavor. It's not for everybody,
really.
But I like it.
Okay. Who do you got?
I think Neighbors is probably my favorite example of when you just see him get the ball in his hands, great things happen after the catch, before the catch, all that stuff. But I think Luther Burden's kind of like what people want the next guy to be in that category.
I mean, the guy that I don't think he's there right now because he's kind of starting to age out, but like 4 years ago, Deebo Samuel on those insanely efficient Niners years, out of the backfield, in the slot, down the field, breaking tackles. I mean, just figure out how to get Deebo the ball in 2021 and good things are going to happen.
Last category is the cardio kings, which they have a role in the NFL. These are guys that are just like, hey, you're running the 9 route. This is what like Dante Thornton Jr. did this past year. It was just like, hey, we're not going to throw it to you, but just run. A lot of empty routes, a lot of empty calories. These are the boneless wings. These are the people that say, you know what? I'm going to a wing place and I'm going to eat with a fork.
You're putting a lot of people on notice listening to this show, Kyle.
I will eat boneless wings if they're in front of me.
If
I'm not going to order.
Option?
But I'm not ordering them. I'm not out of shame.
I
it's
have
just
respect for myself. Okay, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
Come on.
These are wide receivers that they're there, but their purpose really isn't to like be a wing or be a wide receiver. It's
Jahan Dotson.
Oh man, that's
who it is.
I was thinking of what Alec Pierce used to be, and now he's not one of these dudes.
He is going to make a lot of money in about a month. Who else? I'm trying to think of a good example of previously. MVS.
Oh, MVS is one of the best at this kind of stuff. I mean, I will say Andre Yoshivas kind of does this a lot where it's like he's one of the league leaders in routes the last 2 years. And you look up, you're like, oh, you have a 9% target share. Van Jefferson is one of my favorites in this category just because he's been a running joke for so long between us of just like, dude, coaches trust you. You somehow are still in the NFL.
How? I don't know, but he's doing it. He's running the routes.
All right. Let's take a quick break and then we'll talk about these receivers. We have scouted the running backs. We've scouted the quarterbacks, tight ends, wide receivers. Here we come.
Wide receivers.
I love the fact that we get to spend time on these 5 players today. And if you're listening in and you're saying, why are you not talking about this other receiver? All these other podcasts do, or, I already have my opinion. We're still watching film for a lot of these guys. And we have a lot more time in front of us over the next couple weeks where we will have another episode completely on wide receivers. We will have another episode that's literally called Deep Dives. So, hey, I looked at this player who's getting day 2 buzz. Here's what I think about them. Here's what they could be. And we'll also find out what the NFL thinks after the combine. If one of these wide receivers, like one of the names that's getting thrown around a lot is Brennan Thompson at Mississippi State. If he runs a sub 4.3, he's going to end up a day 2 pick.
Probably.
And we would say that you shouldn't really change your opinion about a player based on their 40 time. It's a data point, but for us, like all the other stuff we're seeing should be weighed much more heavily. However, the NFL will look at that player and be like, ooh, I like them a little bit more. John Ross or whoever, as our examples, your buddy Xavier Worthy, who, fast, not as fast in pads, as they say.
Turns out running in a straight line with nobody in front of you does not translate to being a good football player.
We are 3 years removed from that conversation, by the way.
That's crazy, man.
And you know what? This isn't I was right or I was wrong. It was just my comment was I didn't feel like he was as fast in pads.
Sure. Whatever you say, Kyle.
Does he get a good second contract in the NFL?
A good second contract? I think he gets a second contract. I don't know what that means, but yes.
Will he ever
look, Rashee Rice is doing everything in his power to give Xavier Worthy more chances in the NFL. Good Lord,
That's
dude.
True.
So I think he probably gets an opportunity to prove that the truth is probably somewhere in the middle of rookie year without Rice to like what we saw last year, and obviously he was injured. But yeah, I think he gets a second contract.
One of the things that we look at, and we'll reference it as we go through these prospects, is there are certain thresholds that a player meets or doesn't meet based on here's what a wide receiver drafted in the first round has done over the last decade. So we have all the data of if you were drafted in round 1, here's typically what you should look like or you should be close to. So the names that we always throw out there is like Jalen Reagor. His production profile, I went back through it again, blew my mind that a team like the Eagles would draft him so highly, and especially above Justin Jefferson. Imagine.
Terrible franchise.
And yet, he did have an early breakout age. So, like, if you were a breakout age only guy, which I know you are, that's the only part of the spreadsheet, then that would look different. So we have different thresholds we'll talk about. We'll talk about what they did against zone coverage, because that matters a lot. We'll talk about their different, types of player they are. And would you say, before we get into Carnell Tate to start, these are the big 5 that have kind of separated, or you think there's kind of like a couple other names that we should throw in there?
The way that I view this class right now is that there is a big 3 in Carnell Tate, Makai Lemon, and Jordyn Tyson. Then I have a tier break personally. And then I think you could probably, whatever you prefer as far as the next kind of tier, I think KC Concepcion might be like in his own little mini tier, and then like Denzel Boston right after that. But I do agree, like that's probably the top 5 right now. I will say the Omar Cooper Jr. hype train is currently headed full force and probably not going to stop anytime soon. And it's so funny, man. Like this time of year, I love Twitter. Twitter's a great place, but like everybody loves to share, their favorite sleeper, and this guy is definitely going to translate to the pros, and this guy is popping in all my models and all this sort of stuff. And like everybody's favorite sleeper right now is Omar Cooper Jr. And so I don't know if he even is a sleeper anymore. And now he's getting some potential kind of, could he sneak into the first round buzz? And he might enter this kind of back end of the, top 5 type conversation. I know some people have him in their top 4, top 3, as far as like real life NFL rankings do. So he was getting a lot of love. But I would say right now for me, the top 3 at the top are in their own tier, and then you can kind of, sort from there.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of in a similar spot as of this recording right now. And it is a good reminder that everyone ends up copying off each other's papers when it comes to mock draft. Oh, Omar Cooper, he's a top 50 player. Okay, that's kind of like the sentiment of where he goes. And then you just kind of keep reiterating the same fact of what people feel like, oh, he kind of goes in this region, when there's so much we don't know, we don't really understand. The perfect example is Troy Franklin, a player that we all loved a couple of years ago, and you just kind of assumed he'd end up being round 1 or round 2, ends up going to round 4. And it was, it's one thing to say his weight and everything else was a big part of why he wasn't drafted so highly, but for a long time, we just kind of said, this is where he goes. This is like, I didn't have another point other than I liked his production profile, and I thought he'd go in this direction because everybody drafted him there. So things can change. I think for these top couple names, most of them feel like first-round picks, and we'll start with Carnell Tate. Junior out of Ohio State, so a long line of Ohio State wide receivers, which we'll talk about. 6'3", 195, so not as thick maybe as like other people think of these wide receivers like Marv or some of the other wide receivers. He grew up in Chicago. He's a 5-star recruit. He was the number 3 wide receiver coming out of IMG Academy, which I talked about that a couple weeks ago. And then part of his story, just before we even get to the other part, is like he came to college, and one of the first things that happened is his mother died. It's like a huge part of like the backstory of this man.
Yeah, crazy story. Unfortunate, obviously. I know there was some interviews that he did with it, very close with her, and try to like go to college, A, B, play on Ohio State where the pressure is insane, and then have this tragic life event where you have to overcome it, I think speaks a lot to who he is as a person. People talk about him very highly from a football IQ, intelligence. I think he was like, I don't want to misquote this, but I think he earned a lot of like academic honors this past year too at Ohio State. So by all accounts, really good dude, which unfortunately you can't say about everybody that enters the NFL. So the background on this guy is awesome. I will say, if you're looking at this without context at his production profile from an analytical perspective, it's not the best we've ever seen for a guy that's projected by a lot of mocks to go in the top 10. And I would say, barring anything unforeseen, top 15 feels almost like a lock at this point for Carnell Tate. The production profile for that type of guy usually is elite of the elite. For him, it's not, and it's not necessarily his fault. When you go to Ohio State, you understand what's going to happen is you are surrounded by future NFL pros that enter with you, that are in front of you, and then you have guys coming behind you who might be even better, and that's Jeremiah Smith, who is just, one of those guys that you can kind of pencil in for the 101 next year. So I definitely don't want to like overlook the production profile or kind of lack of the elite analytical type stuff, because it does, when you play with these guys as teammates, these future NFL studs, it matters. But I will say, if there's one thing that you could say, like, it's not the best we've ever seen, that is it. That said, early declare, draft capital is going to be there, and he brings a very unique and different skill set than the other two of Makai Lemon and Jordyn Tyson.
Yeah, when you can explain away why he didn't see the raw production of some of the other players that we've seen in the past, or just some of the other players from Ohio State, when you're playing with JSN, you're playing with Marv, Ekbuka. Julian Fleming was actually a really big wide receiver coming out of high school.
Transferred to Penn State and did nothing.
Why? Why did that happen?
We're not going to talk about
that. So you can explain away a lot of stuff. If he's drafted in the top 10, which is kind of where he's being mocked a lot of the time, if he's drafted in the top 10, he would have the lowest final season targets per out run of any top 10 wide receiver drafted over the last decade. It's at 23%. Now, there are players in college that if you go back to their profiles, you go, okay, Justin Jefferson, his final year at LSU was only targeted on 23% of his routes. It did not mean that he couldn't command it. He just had a first-round pick and Jamar Chase on the team and a second-round pick and Terrace Marshall Jr. on the team. So, you gotta get the targets to lockjaw when you get a chance. But I think what Tate, the early story I want to share is just that he does all the right things. And a player like that, you can look at their college production and just say that's all they are. I've kind of moved in the direction of like, man, what else could he be? And I think NFL teams are also looking at it that way. He led the nation in passer rating when targeted. He led the class in receiving EPA per target by a wide margin. And if you look at just his catches, like what he did when he caught the ball over the last 2 years, 63 of his 92 receptions were either a first down or a touchdown. So like the big plays, the money plays were there all throughout the film. The Wisconsin game was maybe my favorite one to watch, where he was just unbelievable everywhere. So my headline is, I tried to poke holes into why I shouldn't like this guy for the breakout age and everything else, but I think he has the tools to be successful at the next level.
He does. Yeah, he really does. And when you kind of think about the highlights of Carnell Tate, you probably, if you've watched college football this year, if you just are looking back at his highlights from this year, you're going to pop on, a YouTube clip or something. You're going to see a lot of deep targets and a lot of insane body control catches down the field. But if you watch him in totality, that's not all he does. I think the NFL will very, very highly value him for that role, which is kind of hard to find nowadays. Like these guys that can really take the top off the defense and earn targets. I think his second gear when he gets to the next level is like insanely special. His body control is elite. He's a very good hands catcher on the sideline, multiple times getting 2 feet in bounds, even though you only do one in college. Like he looks like an NFL wide receiver, and teams will value that piece that he brings to the puzzle. But I also think there's a little bit of an untapped ceiling here with Carnell Tate. I think he can do more than just that deep target type stuff. And if you watch him, he does a really good job, I think, coming back to the quarterback, especially on like scramble drills and stuff like that. So the football IQ is there, but to me, his special sauce is really that second gear when he gets to, over the top, those 20-plus yard targets. He is insanely talented at those. And like I said, the NFL is always looking for that next guy that can bring that to their team and to their offense. So I think he's going to provide a ton of value for an NFL team right away in year one. I do have just not a concern, but like maybe a question mark. Like if we look back in a year on this class, would we really be that surprised if it was like, oh, Carnell Tate had a nice rookie season. He wasn't a Jamar Chase type of guy where he caught, 40 to 50 catches for 600 yards and like 6 touchdowns. I wouldn't be surprised by that. I think he's got a guy that maybe have to learn a little bit in the NFL, but there's so much to like about Carnell Tate that I don't want to overthink it too much.
Yeah, the word that gets thrown around a lot, and I think it's an Ohio State thing, which their offensive coordinator, wide receiver coach is Brian Hartline. If you know that name, he was in the NFL.
He left.
Where's he at now?
I think he's the head coach at South Florida.
That's news to me.
I'm going to bet that in case I'm lying.
He has been the wide receiver coach and OC in the past because now Arthur Smith is the OC. And the word that gets thrown around a lot about these wide receivers is they're polished. And you've seen the fifth consecutive draft, we're going to have a wide receiver taken in the first round from Ohio State. Like it's the dudes, it's JSN, it's Olave, Garrett Wilson, all the guys. And when you look at the type of routes that he runs, you talked about the deep ball. So 26% of his routes were go routes. But he also had 25% that were hitch or curl routes, which are kind of like the technical routes that the really good wide receivers who can take the top of the defense can also turn around. So Olave was one of those guys that had at least 20% go route and 25% hitch. Another one is Terry McLaurin, 2 Ohio State wide receivers, which I know I'm connecting the dots here. But I think that's the type of routes. I think the player I would comp him to most, and we're kind of light on giving comps, is I think he has the ball skills of T. Higgins, but he runs routes and his size is more like a Calvin Ridley, who is also a first-round wide receiver. And I say all of that to say, I think Tate, you have it in the notes here too, I think he fits really well as a 2 in the NFL, and people won't want to hear that. But that's like a really good NFL player who's going to get a huge second contract.
For sure. I have seen some comps thrown around too, like a George Pickens type player, which makes a lot of sense when you think about his build and kind of how he wins down the field. And it wasn't until finally this year that we really saw the full potential of George Pickens unlocked. That, that's what I was saying. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if it just takes a little bit of time here with Tate, but the talent is there. The draft capital is going to be there. Obviously, the pedigree is there. So there's so much to like about Carnell Tate. And before we do move on, I did want to confirm Brian Hartline, South Florida.
Okay, makes sense. Another comp I see is Brian Thomas Jr., and that has a bad taste in our mouth now. A year ago, we'd been like, oh my gosh, this is another Brian Thomas Jr. I think at the end of the day, if he gets more crossing routes, which they didn't run a ton at Ohio State, I think there's a bigger ceiling that you talked about here. But in my rookie drafts right now, I think he feels like a very safe pick. I would be very happy if I had a top 5 pick and I could take Carnell Tate because he's going to get the draft capital that goes along with it. I'm not expecting year one just like blow the doors off, but the dude can do it all. He's a really good blocker too. I will say this whole class, the guys are willing to block a lot more than maybe guys we've seen in the past.
What do they say? No block, no rock?
Yeah, that was the JMO thing, and then JMO switched, man.
Now he's the guy.
Now he's the man. Next one we're going to talk about is Jordyn Tyson, and we're going in order of where they are in NFL mock draft database. In our rookie ranks in the Dynasty Pass, all 3 ballers have him at number 1. Would you have him at 1 right now?
I think right now, without knowing specific draft capital, I mean, we're assuming obviously round 1 for all these guys. I personally do have Jordyn Tyson there. There's concerns, which we'll talk about, but if you look analytically at like, does he fail at anything from an analytics perspective? To me, the answer is no. And when you add in the round 1 draft capital with that background, the breakout age, the reception share, the dominator rating, the yards per team pass attempt, all these things, like he really checks every box. So for me right now, I do have him as 1. I will say I have a soft spot in my heart for Makai Lemon, who we'll talk about. I think he is most likely to step on the field, have a role, and produce right away. So if you look for that in your rookie drafts over potential ceiling or something like that, I wouldn't fault anybody. But right now, as things stand, I do have him as my 1.
Tyson is a redshirt junior because he had a medical redshirt in 2023 with his collarbone injury. I know we'll talk about injury stuff. That's one of the big concerns in a second. 6'2", 200. He's from Allen, Texas, same high school that Kyler Murray went to. And he first arrived at Colorado before Deion was there. And one of the most intriguing things about Tyson is that he has the earliest breakout age of anybody in this class. In fact, the only guys, I'm going back like a really long time, that have a breakout age of 18.1, meaning like you were that young when you hit this threshold, is like Drake London and then blast from the past, Jordan Matthews.
Dude, there were some fun years with Jordan Matthews in fantasy before things fell apart.
It's just, at the end of the day, it's rare for someone to step onto campus and be the number 1 wide receiver. Now, the counting stats aren't crazy for him, but I actually think his best game, like maybe his best game in his entire career, was as a freshman on Colorado against Arizona State, which is just crazy to think. I mean, he was killing it in the punt game too, but his story is interesting because Dion arrives, he breaks his collarbone, and he's basically told with the new regime in Colorado, like, hey, I don't know if you have a spot here. And that is the story for a lot of that Colorado team. Like, is either like you're totally in Travis Hunter style, or you're like totally out, which is fine. Everybody has different things going on. NIL money started to get thrown around. He transfers to Arizona State, and then recently, I don't know if you saw these headlines, when they played each other again, Tyson, after the game, sought out Sanders and basically said, dude, I was sorry. And Sanders said that meant a lot to him, and he's kind of vouched for him publicly, like, this dude is a legit person off the field.
No, I hadn't seen that, but that's good to know. I mean, we always get so stuck in the weeds on like the put this guy in a spreadsheet and do all the fun stuff, but it's like these are human beings, and that matters.
Yep. His big brother, another fun fact, is in the NBA, 6'6", was a first-round pick for the Cavs, so athletic family. And then my other favorite fact that I found is that his wide receiver coach at Arizona State is Hines Ward, most people would say he's the best blocking wide receiver of all time, him or Larry Fitzgerald. And you can see how he progressed from Colorado to Arizona State in the blocking department. But before we get into the numbers, like, talk about his injury history, because that's like the big red flag that a lot of people have.
Yeah, you'll notice that I don't want to say it's split because these guys are all kind of top tier regardless of what game you play, whether it's fantasy or if you're a real life NFL fan or an NFL draft analyst. But you'll see a lot of fantasy folks very high on Jordyn Tyson for the analytical type stuff. And then you'll see NFL draft scouts mention, hey, NFL teams are going to flag Jordyn Tyson because of his injury history.
Injury nerds like you.
I mean, can you imagine caring about that? Couldn't be me. And you'll see him lower on teams' boards because of that. So yeah, you mentioned the fractured collarbone. That was one piece of the puzzle. But he also had a multi-ligament ACL injury when he first started at Colorado. That was an ACL, PCL, and MCL. And then this past season dealt with hamstring issues. There was a report he wasn't likely to do everything at the combine this week because of just making sure his hamstring was right. I got actually asked about that on Twitter a bunch, like, hey, are you worried about that? Not necessarily. These guys want to make the best decisions possible for them. And if they are 80%, 90% of where they could be, they don't want to put out a bad 40 time or something like that. So I'm not super surprised by that with Tyson, but that's the injury history that people keep talking about. The ACL, the collarbone, and then the hamstring issues that plagued him this past year.
What's interesting about Tyson is when you turn on the tape, which, I mean, imagine not turning on the tape.
Couldn't be me.
He faces arguably like the toughest coverage of anybody. Like 40% of his routes were press coverage. And as you're watching, it's like, these aren't free releases the way that a lot of these guys, either from the slot or somewhere else, like these are really, really tough matchups that he has. And the teams understood at Arizona State that like this was the dude there. His production profile is really strong across the board, and it's going to look really good. The only area that's kind of low was against zone coverage this past year, only 2.18 yards per route run. In the previous year, 2.34. It's kind of low compared to most prospects. I'm kind of growing and going back and forth, figuring out with zone coverage. It's like there are certain prospects that didn't excel because their quarterback did not excel against zone coverage. So it's like I can't always hold that against them. They dealt with injuries this past year with Sam Levitt going down. So at the end of the day, he wins in so many different ways. I think he's the best route runner in this class. And create separation where you go, that's what wins in the NFL. That's what makes sense. That's why this guy's going to profile as a wide receiver one.
Yeah, and I mentioned when we were doing our little wing segment at the start, what wins today in the league is these guys that can move inside, outside, and have that versatility. That's what Jordyn Tyson can do. 34% slot rate the last 2 seasons at ASU, spent about 2/3 of his time on the perimeter. So you can move him inside in the slot. You can play him on the outside as a true perimeter guy. You can move him all around the formation. And the way he wins, I think, kind of fits the NFL today in some ways. Like gone are the days of, hey, you're bigger than everybody else. You're a huge X receiver, good on the field and bully guys. Like there's still some of those guys left, but the way that players win now is this finesse type stuff where you can kind of move all around the formation, win with route running. That's what Jordyn Tyson does. So there's a lot to like about Jordyn Tyson when you watch him play. I would say he's more like slippery and kind of a finesse wide receiver than a physical type guy, which I just mentioned. And you mentioned, it's interesting in that I say that because the fact about him being pressed a bunch at the line of scrimmage, I didn't realize it was so high. I just wonder how that will translate to the NFL. But analytically, it's off the charts. You had the first round draft capital. You add the talent. I think that he has some really insane wow moments on tape where diving catches, acrobatic type stuff in the air. Like He is a very, very good athlete who is a very good wide receiver. Like I said, the only question really I think that a lot of people have on him is, do NFL teams dock him from an injury perspective? Does he slip to 18, 19, 20 range as opposed to, hey, this would be a top 10 pick if it wasn't for the injury stuff? We'll have to sort that out over the next, 2 or 3 months. But I do think there's so much to like about Jordyn Tyson. Like I mentioned, as things stand right now, he is my one in this class for fantasy.
One of the games I would encourage people to watch is the Texas Tech game. You saw 16 targets, but there's at least 3 times where he left the game injured, including he playing through a hamstring injury. And then at the end of the game, like when he has the injury, and even the announcers are like, oh man, Tyson's down again. He comes back, has this huge 4th down conversion, and then he draws a PI in the end zone, and they end up winning the game. It's like, it's crazy stuff. So I don't think if he's gonna run or not run, we were just talking about that. I think he'd probably run in the 4 or 5 range, and I don't care. I just don't care.
Matter. Yeah, it doesn't matter. These are the guys that I'm always gravitated towards. Like, there's so many times where teams and people will mention, like, hey, I know he didn't earn a ton of targets in college, but like when he gets to the pros, he'll do this. It's like, that hasn't worked ever. That doesn't work. But the guys that can earn targets, and I would say earn targets like at an elite level that we care about in fantasy, Jordyn Tyson can do that. He averaged in his career over 30% targets throughout run. This past year, it was over 32%. So if there's a guy whose profile says, hey, I can be an alpha, you can build your offense around me, I think that's Jordyn Tyson.
Yeah, if you're looking at like comps based on the routes that he ran, it's a lot of JSN, it's a lot of Diggs, those type of wide receivers that win more as like a finesse type route runner than pure like size. And then if we're giving some comps of like who gets the draft capital like this, who has the skills and the size, the highest end comp I can give is like you could be a CD. And I don't really want to throw that out a lot. I think I liked saying Devonta Smith, but the more filled out version in terms of like just not paper thin.
Yeah.
Which is a compliment too, because we both like him. So I think we're going to be high on Tyson for fantasy. He's going to work. He's going to get so many targets like right off the bat if it's in the right situation. Don't go to the Jets.
Oh, man, I was just thinking about it. Like, there's like this pit in my stomach that like one of these 3 guys is going to go to the Jets because they're in prime territory, like right in the middle of the first round. The 3rd wide receiver in this class will be there. Remember, zoom out. We draft for talent.
Yes. I'm still taking him. I don't care where he lands.
But that would hurt for a short term, at least.
All right, let's take a quick break, and then we'll talk about Betts' favorite guy, Makai Lemon. We are back, and we're talking about Makai Lemon, junior wide receiver out of USC, 5'11", 195. He is from Los Alamitos, California, or as the locals would say, Los Al. He was a Griffin. And what's really fun doing a deep dive on that high school is like so many famous actors and singers have come from that high school, like Pedro Pascal, the actor. Like that's what the school's actually more known for. He originally committed to Oklahoma, and then when Lincoln Riley went to USC, he went there. It was a slow build. And yet this past season, like the big semi-yellow flag, I will say, is just the later breakout age of 21.3. So it took a little bit to get going. And yet he just won the Biletnikoff Award, and his tape is really fun to watch. Really, really, really fun player. So I'm gonna hand it over to you.
Yeah, I love Makai Lemon. Right now I have Tyson at the top, but it might be a point in this offseason where I feel like Lemon might be the preferred guy, just depending on...
just feeling spunky?
Just depending on the day, what kind of mood I'm in when I wake up. But that's why I was saying these top 3 are in their own tier, and I think they're all awesome targets in the early part of your rookie drafts. You shouldn't feel disappointed if you get the 3rd of this group. They're all awesome. Makai Lemon, to me, and this is the part you were mentioning earlier, it's just a different flavor. He's not the same player as Jordyn Tyson. He's not the same player as Carnell Tate. But the way he wins, I think, is very conducive to today's NFL, and I think is going to work. It's these guys that can win in the short to intermediate area of the field. And when I say that, you might think like gadgety type guy. That's not the case at all with Makai Lemon. He also saw a bunch of targets down the field, and the knock on him, or at least like the mild concern from a how does this translate to the league perspective, is that he played a ton in the slot. But we've seen that doesn't necessarily mean you're only going to be a slot wide receiver in the NFL. And there are routes where he's on the perimeter and wins, and there's a lot of fun moments there too. And his yards per route run actually popped from the perimeter this past season. So I think he can be one of those. And it's so annoying because everybody's making the comp with that Amon-Ra style where it's like, hey, you are a slot guy, but if we go to 2 tight ends and it's a 2 wide receiver set, you're not going to leave the field. You can also play on the perimeter. I personally think Makai Lemon can do that. Maybe the NFL feels differently. So if there is one thing that you could kind of say, like, is that going to happen in the NFL? We'll have to wait and find out. But the production this year is off the charts, and another early declare. And the peripherals are so good. One of the only guys in this class that averaged 3+ yards per route run against both man and zone coverage, according to PFF. So he is looking like an awesome, awesome pick in this class, and one of those guys that I would be super excited to take in the top 3 or 4 picks.
Yeah, if you're looking for a slot wide receiver, on the outset, you would say, okay, well, this is the guy in the class. I mean, there's other guys, Omar Cooper Jr., Zachariah Branch, I'm using quotes, if you think of him as a wide receiver and not just like an
athlete.
And an extension of the run game. Antonio Williams of Clemson, those are kind of the guys that were heavy slot guys. And the reason why I'm kind of using asterisks there is that Amon-Ra is basically a 50-50 guy right now in terms of where his routes are. It's grown from early on that first season when, he caught Betz's eye and Betz hasn't looked back since. That little end of season run changed his life. He's been 50-50, and we want players that can be versatile. So Egbuka was one of those guys last year that came in. It's like, oh, if you need a slot guy right away, he ran 81% of his routes at Ohio State this final year to do that. He's that guy. Justin Jefferson ran 98% of his routes inside the slot. Same thing with Juju. I know we laugh at Juju now, but he was a really good prospect and had a really good first couple years. It's the players that can transition the NFL and become more than a slot wide receiver that have crazy ceilings. That's CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee is slot, and yet he can do anything on the field. So you're saying to me that when you mix in the production profile, the way the NFL is structured, and just being a dog, because, dear Lord, for someone that's only 5'11", when the ball's in the air, I feel like he just comes down with it more often than not. And then even after the catch, he forces up. That's the combo that gets you hot and heavy.
For sure. And to point to that, I think he does have the dog. 21 missed tackles forced this past year for a guy that, like you said, relative to other big body NFL wide receivers is air quotes undersized. Tells you a lot about the player. He's competitive. He also, fun story, man, he played both ways in high school. He played offense and defense. And when he started in college, he played a little bit of corner too. So I think that brings out that competitive toughness that you see when he has the ball in his hands. So yeah, I love Makai Lemon. A very fun, popular, I'm copying off your mock type of situation right now is Makai Lemon to the Jets. Or excuse me, not the Jets, the Saints. And picturing what he could be in Kellen Moore's offense next to Chris Olave, that gets you hot and heavy. So yeah, if he lands with a creative playmaker, I think in year one, it wouldn't be surprising if you look back and we're like, oh, he was the most productive guy of the top 3. I wouldn't be surprised by that at all.
The NFL is always changing in the way that slot wide receivers and just defenses are approaching. And I feel like the Seahawks are the perfect example where there was this move to 2-eye safety looks across the NFL the last couple years. And then the Seahawks, there's been a lot of discussion about this, basically said here's what we're showing you pre-snap. Oh, wait, here's after the snap what it's going to look like. And it's the safeties are shifting and all the assignments before the snap and after the snap are completely different. Slot wide receivers actually had a really bad year across the board. It was the lowest yards per route run for slot routes in the NFL in a long, long time. And I think things change over time. We think of the slot wide receivers that used to just absolutely kill in the NFL, Keenan, all those type of guys. It just ebbs and flows. And so I want a player that's versatile, and I think Lemon can do that. So please hear what we're saying. This is not a slot-only dude, where I think the other guys, I think Cooper and Antonio Williams specifically is slot only. That's what I view him as. I think Lemon is really good in the slot and can also be other stuff. And my last little note is his body control is really legit. For someone who's not a leaper, he's not going to test out very well in the vertical.
Why? Because he's shorter?
He doesn't jump that high, man. I'm going to be honest.
Wow, Kyle giving his jumping takes here. After the speed debacle, you want to be now the jump guy?
Also, I did have that down. I don't think he has top end speed.
No, I don't think so either. But again, it's we know through years of data that doesn't really matter. So he's not going to be the guy when people are leaving Indy being like, dude, did you see Makai Lemon's 40? That's not what people are going to talk about. It doesn't matter. When you put on the tape and you watch him play, he's a good, refined route runner, and that's what wins today, not necessarily the speed.
All right, so the comps that show up in terms of routes are Khalil Shakir, which we think of as slot-only guy. Ladd, who kind of actually does everything on the field, although we think slot-only. And then obviously Amon-Ra shows up. My kind of old school medium comp for him, because I can't give anything other than Amon-Ra, is Jordyn Tate, who actually started out his career as down the field guy, moved in the slot later on. And then my low end, people are going to think this is a slap in the face, is Sterling Shepard, who had a long career in the NFL.
He was just playing this past year.
Are those not kind? Are those not high enough comps?
I want to try to find one that isn't Amon-Ra because it's so easy to copy and paste. And USC and same style of player, but like that really is like kind of what I think of when I watch him play. But we do need to figure out a better high-end comp. I've seen some JSN stuff. I don't know. But I think the Jordyn Tate one's actually kind of interesting. And if you've only been playing fantasy recently, like that means nothing to you. But like Jordyn Tate had some years where like he was awesome. So I don't want that to be viewed negatively.
Yes. Yeah, of course. All right. Next name we're going to talk about is Denzel, my man, Boston. I got to throw out a Denzel Washington reference. Denzel Boston, I need to confess, is not usually the flavor that I go after in fantasy, because if you don't look at the film, if you don't look at anything else, you just go, okay, this is a jump ball guy, and jump ball guys in the NFL don't work out very much. I feel like there's a little bit more to him as I've kind of grown and watching his film, learning his story. I also need to point this out because this is everywhere on the internet, and this is Kyle's soapbox moment. Why researching with AI does not cut it. Because if you
listen here, kids.
Kids, listen up. I don't know, you and whatever you're doing right now. Denzel Boston is not related to David Boston, the former All-Pro wide receiver who played for the Chargers, Cardinals, lots of teams. His dad is Chris. His dad sells insurance, man. And if you ask AI, is Denzel Boston related to David Boston? AI will say, oh yeah, David Boston is his dad. This is not true.
You have the test to prove it, or what?
Oh, dude, local county court records are very, very clear.
Glad you cleared that up for us, Kyle, because I know everybody was thinking it. You're right, though, man. Like, this is the guy that when I first started diving into all these wide receiver prospects, you kind of hear like, okay, if there's one guy who's going to be a traditional X receiver in this class, this is the guy. And like when I hear that, I'm like, okay, he probably is more of a down the field type guy, wins at the catch point. And we know historically, like that used to work in 2015. That doesn't necessarily always work right now. And while I do think that is part of his skill set, obviously, like he's the type of guy you throw it up in the red zone and let him go get it because he will win. It's not a 50-50 ball. I think it's more like 60-40 in my opinion when it goes up for him. He's that good in the air. His hands are insanely strong when he's in contested catch situations. But when you hear that, you might think, okay, that's all he does, and then therefore boom or bust type player. And while I still think he does kind of have a boom bust overall profile, if you actually watch him play, like they get him involved on screen sometimes. He was used as a returner in the punt game, which that is a large human being to be returning punts. And he was effective at that. There's some nice moments where he can kind of sit in the zone and then create after the catch. So I initially was kind of low on Denzel Boston. I was like, we've seen this story before. Probably isn't going to work. The more I went back and watched him, I kind of had more of an appreciation for his game. So if he does get that round one draft capital, which a lot of people think he will, kind of sneak into maybe like the 22 to like 32 range. If he gets that and he does have some nice stuff in his profile from an analytical perspective, I'm kind of interested in him, where he could go in the middle to like later third of rookie drafts in the first round. And I would be totally fine taking a shot there on him. I do think he does have a wide range of outcomes, but I'm more willing to see the possibility of it working in the NFL than I was maybe a month ago.
He has a later breakout age of 20.8. So the slow production, 7 catches through his first 2 years in college, which you can also explain away thinking of those Washington teams with Rome Odunze, Jalen McMillan, and the great Jalen Polk. Of course, couldn't forget that dude.
Second round pick.
And now flipping burgers? I don't know what he's doing, man.
I think he's on the Saints. I think they traded for him while he was on IR.
I have no clue what that. I'm going to do a deep dive. Check in on him. Just you got to check in on your friends. See how they're doing.
This year's biggest sleeper, Jalen Polk on the Saints. You heard it here first.
Everyone's like, biggest sleeper. Everyone's like, I did not know he was on the Saints. So he's 6'4", Denzel Boston, 6'4", 210. And if you look at wide receivers that have kind of fit this body type, like just being taller, 6'4" or taller recently. Drake London 2022, Quentin Johnson 2023, Marvin 2024, and last year it was Tetairoa McMillan. So those have been the taller wide receivers where we've talked about how the NFL has kind of gone away from this traditional mold where Denzel Boston in 2004, oh baby,
Top
number
5
one
pick.
overall. Yeah, easily. 14 of his 18 career touchdowns have come against man coverage. And so if I did have to give a red flag for me, is that against zone coverage, it's not been great in his career. 1.81 yards per out run, only targeted on 21% of his routes. I also watched a lot of Washington film, and Damon Williams is not the best thrower of the football at all.
That's a nice way to say it.
Yeah, I was trying to be nice. I just feel like a lot of the zone coverage stuff, he didn't see it and didn't trust himself. And so a lot of the balls are late. So, you could do that. But a lot of the routes that we're seeing here from Boston are deep. 40% of his routes were either posts, goes, or crossers. And that makes a very difficult evaluation at the NFL level. There are players that came in like that Nico Collins, and then they refined their routes, and then they were used more in the intermediate and short area stuff, and it worked. But if you're not, you're going to end up just being a deep ball guy, and that's scary to me. But I will agree, like, there were more screens than I thought in his game, considering he was 6'4".
Yeah, for sure. And I do think, like, if you're kind of leaning one way or the other, like, how does he profile in the NFL? I do think it's the mold of the traditional X receiver. You use him down the field, you throw him a 50-50 ball, and like that obviously invites a wide range of outcomes where it's like he catches all of them and he's great for fantasy, or he's missing them and obviously he's a bust. But I do think there's some untapped potential, and one of those guys that just because he did this in college means he will do this in the pros, I think is misleading on Boston, because like I said, when you watch him, they do more with him and use him in creative ways that I think there's a potential that he could do that in the NFL. I just don't know how likely it is, and it's going to take the right scheme, I think. So that's why I was saying, like, I obviously prefer the other guys way above Denzel Boston. But like initially I was like, this isn't going to work. And then I watched more of him and I was like, this could work in the right scheme. So I'm leaving the light on for Boston. Let's see where he goes in the NFL draft, and let's see kind of what information we get over the next 2-3 months.
Yeah, a couple final notes here. Willing blocker. I wouldn't call him a fluid route runner, not a burner, but his hands look reliable. High pointing the ball is probably his best attribute. And off the line of scrimmage, I feel like there's a couple times where it's just like, man, this took a while to get up to speed.
Yeah, I see that too.
So, but it's one of those players where if I'm lower on the analytical side, I don't love the zone coverage, I look at that stuff, my natural inclination would be like, I just don't like this. He lands in the right situation with the right team. It's like, oh, I like you as a wide receiver too for a team in the NFL. I saw the other day the Bills in one of the mocks, and I was like, gosh, do I trust this guy to be the wide receiver 1 for the Bills? I don't see him like soaking up 130 targets.
No, I don't either. I did also really think it was funny, and I'm obviously not slighting any mock drafters out there, but I know Daniel Jeremiah also in his most recent one had Malachi Fields mock to the Bills, and I thought it was just perfection. It was like the same, they just did this with Keon Coleman, right? Where it's like,
right,
can't really separate, more of a big body type guy. I don't know how he works in the NFL. And like they just did that with him and it didn't work. So I just thought that was funny. But yeah, that it does, like I said, it's going to take the right scheme and the right system. I don't know if I see him ever being a 1, quite honestly. But we say that about players all the time and they change. So who knows? All
right, last name, and I need you to get out your fingers, people. I need you to pinch those fingers.
Yes.
This is for people that are in the finer things club, okay? People that appreciate good art, deep things. It's Casey Concepcion of Texas A&M. Kevin, if you just want to call him Kev. 5'11", 190. This is a player that Betz and I have just really enjoyed throughout the process. He's from Charlotte. He was a 3-star recruit. Chambers High School Cougars, the same high school, college teammates with James Pierce Jr., former Atlanta Falcons player. And I use former lightly because I don't know where he's going to land with all his legal trouble. But Concepcion started at NC State, transferred to Texas A&M. Interesting story, man. Right at the get-go as a freshman was used so much. Also, his story is really, really great. He speaks with a stutter. His dad speaks with a stutter. And he's talked about how he's had to overcome public speaking fears. Anyway, I just loved his story, loved learning more about it. He was an All-American this past year. He was also the Paul Hornung Award winner as college football's most versatile player. And when you're projecting him from what he did in college to the pros, there's like he's the playmaker one when we talked about that earlier, the Luther Burden, the Malik Neighbors.
Yeah, that award that he won is just so fitting for how he plays because he can literally do a little bit of everything, and it's actually super fun. So if you want to have fun in your rookie drafts and you want to have so much fun when you pronounce the pick to your league mates, Casey Concepcion, a little accent there at the end, this is your guy. I will say his production profile is actually pretty off the charts, like early breakout age. And there's so much signal too. Like sometimes we knock guys, we're like, oh, they used him out of the backfield as a running back type stuff. Is it fluky? Is it this? Is it that? It's also a signal of, hey, the coaches value your talent enough to say, we got to just figure out how to get this guy the ball. This guy had 70 career rushing attempts. That is insane for a wide receiver. And he's also electric and insanely dynamic in the return game, which we don't always like to necessarily bank on that for fantasy. But like that, again, is a signal, hey, let's get the ball in his hands and let him make plays. So when I watch him, like the first thing I just think of in my mind is just playmaker. Like that's what I see when he has the ball. Electric after the catch. And I think a guy that probably has some learning to do as like an NFL receiver, but the tools are there. And there's enough in the analytical profile that says this certainly could work, especially if he does sneak into the back of the first round, which some people are at least projecting right now. He kind of seems like a fringe first, second round pick. But the thing that I loved when I watched him and when I looked at some of his usage and the underlying type stuff, his slot rate changed year over year as he grew as a college player. So in year one, 93% at NC State. It's like, okay, this is definitely what you're doing. Year two was 82%. It's like, okay, you're pretty much still just a wide receiver in the slot. Then this past year, A&M like actually did some big boy routes and big boy stuff, 34% in the slot. So he did transition into this kind of inside out versatility guy. So again, as we talk about what wins in today's NFL, can you move around the formation? Can you get the ball in your hands a bunch of different ways? Can you win on the outside? Those are all things I think that Casey Concepcion can do. And so, yeah, I do think this guy's one of those players that's very, very versatile, kind of a funky evaluation and kind of a funky fit in the NFL, but there's a lot that I think could work here for fantasy.
I'm down with the funky fresh, man. If we're trying to figure out from film in our mother's basements what NFL teams might do and how this person, like there's so many different areas to this that we can't figure out. A fun stat when I was kind of comparing him and it's like, man, has anybody ever had this type of production profile? Here are the only wide receivers since 2000 to be drafted with 2,200 career receiving yards and over 400 rushing yards. Khalil Shakir, Wan'Dale Robinson, Casey Concepcion. You might laugh at that and go, those are funny players. Khalil Shakir got a second contract. Wan'Dale's probably going to get a solid contract in the NFL. And Wan'Dale just saw over 140 targets in back-to-back seasons. So gadgety, yes. I think Concepcion is more than those players, though.
I agree. And the Wan'Dale comp, in fantasy, we have a negative connotation. It's like, okay, yeah, you're getting these like 3-yard ADOTs. Who cares? And like, I could see the same path for Casey Concepcion, where it's like, initially, he kind of needs that stuff. And then he kind of learns the NFL position and he grows and he can actually do all the things. Wan'Dale Robinson saw a bunch of targets down the field this year.
What if I told you he had more 20-plus air yard receptions than Jamison Williams this year?
I would believe that because for the first 10 weeks or whatever it was, John Morton said, we're not doing that. Come on, John. But I think that comp actually makes a lot of sense as far as how his NFL career could go. And you might think, that stinks. But like, if you have the 107 or whatever and he kind of falls to you there, it's like, these guys aren't all going to turn into Jamar Chase. Like, we need to be realistic about this. So what are you getting with those picks? Could this guy turn into a wide receiver 2 for fantasy, a wide receiver 3? I think so. And we all want the Jamar Chase, right? But like, these guys that are going to stick around the league and kind of have the shelf life that we care about in Dynasty, the worst thing you can do is take your rookie pick, light it on fire, and all of a sudden now you're kind of stuck in the same position you were a year ago. I don't think that's the case with this type of player. So I'm definitely higher, I think, than market on him. I think he is certainly worthy of being considered above Denzel Boston for me personally. And I know there's some people out there who kind of have him like right up there with like just behind the big three. And for me, that's a little spicy, but I kind of understand it. So I think he's a player that it might take a funky kind of route to get to where he's ultimately going to go in the NFL. But like I said, I do see the path where this will work for fantasy.
All right, a couple of notes. I need to give at least one semi-negative that will be brought up. It's about his hands and his drops. And
the drops, yeah.
Yeah, he had 19 total drops in 3 years. And then my note next to that says, I don't care. Because because drop rate is by far, if you stack up every single statistic in the NFL, it is the least predictive in terms of future points per game in fantasy. It's the least. It doesn't matter. It actually has a negative correlation year over year. So the player who led the league in drops this year, do you know who that was?
Oh, this would be a great question that I should have tried to figure out beforehand. No, I have no idea.
I'll give you a hint. He's your favorite player in the NFL.
Amon-Ra?
Yeah.
That guy sucks.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like CD had problems with drops. Year over year, it's not a very stable statistic. And at the end of the day, if you're, being paid and you are the 1 or 2 on a team, the drops are going to pile up because when you end up seeing 160 targets, yeah, the math says you're going to end up dropping some of them. You're not going to catch everything. So that's one of the issues people bring up. The twitchiness, the note that I have is just explosivo. He's there. So the comps in terms of his routes are Khalil Shakir, Marquise Hollywood Brown, which is another wild comp, the way that he's been used, Chimere DK, the way that he was used this year all over the map. And then another one, if you're just looking at the type of routes he ran, a lot of Justin Jefferson stuff too. So I think that it could go all over the place. He's a player that I'm higher on as well. My favorite actual comp when I combine draft capital, size, skill, everything else is Emmanuel Sanders, which maybe people listening now don't realize. Like Emmanuel Sanders was a really, really good wide receiver and a wide receiver 1 in fantasy for multiple years. So the low end though is he Kadarius Toney? And I hope not.
Please no. I still think Kadarius Toney would have worked if he wasn't always injured and had some other things going on. One of my favorite things about him though, when I was watching him, is if you just envision the right scheme and the right system, get this guy moving pre-snap, players are not gonna be able to follow him on crossers and slants and stuff like that, where he already has a leg up in terms of speed. He's just so explosive. So I do think if there is one guy leaving Indy where it's man, he's turning heads, look at his athletic testing. Obviously we talked about Kenyon Sadiq and some other guys last week on the running backs. I do think Casey Concepcion is going to be one of those guys after the combine. If he does everything, we'll see.
He's such a fun guy to root for. Anyway, he's probably going to be somebody that we keep talking about over and over again. Actually, all 5 of those wide receivers, I don't know if you could tell people, I liked talking about them. I really enjoyed the prospects. I enjoyed that part of the process. And the best part is that's not the end of it, because next couple episodes, we will be talking about some of the other wide receivers, the Jeremy Bernard, who did get targets at Washington way back in the day, ahead of Denzel Boston. That's an interesting little thing you throw in there. Chris Bell, I know he dealt with injury stuff, but he's an interesting name. Malachi Fields, all over the map of what people think. So Elijah Surratt, your JMU boy.
Both EIU guys. Cooper.
They're super interesting names. So this class, I would say it offers a lot of quality and quantity, and we're going to get to go through all of them. Next week, though, here's a fun tease. We will be doing our first rookie mock draft on the podcast.
Oh, baby.
So
right after the combine.
Right after the combine, we're going to be Makalaka ding-donging. It's going to be a good time.
And corporate will be back.
We think.
Maybe.
We think they'll be back. Anyway, head on over to dynastypass.com. We'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast. If you want to take your dynasty skills to the next level, check out thefantasyfootballers.com.